021, Chapter 4, The Ideology of Competition. Creative monopoly means new products that benefits everybody and sustainable profits for creators. Competition means no profits for nobody, no meaningful differentiation, and a struggle for survival. So, why do people believe that competition is healthy? The answer is that competition is not an economic concept or a simple inconvenience that individuals and companies must deal with. In the marketplace, more than anything else, competition is an ideology, the ideology that provides our society and distorts our thinking. We preach competition, internalized its necessity, and enact its commandants, and as a result, we trap ourselves within it. And even though the more we compete, and less we gain. This is a simple truth, but we have all been trained to ignore it. Our educational system both drives the reflects our obsession with competitions. Grades themselves allow precise measurements of each student's competitiveness. Pupil with the highest marks receives a status and credentials. We teach every young person the same subject in mostly the same ways, irrespective of individual talent and preferences. Students who don't learn best by sitting still at a desk are made to feel somehow inferior, and while children who excel in the conventional measurements, like tests and assignments, and of defining their identities in terms of weirdly convinced academic parallel reality. And it gets worse as the students ascend to higher levels of tournaments. Allied students climb confidently until they reach a level of competition sufficiently intense to beat their dreams out of them. Higher education is the place where people who had big plans for higher schools get stuck in the Firenze revivals, and equally smart peers over conventional careers like management consulting and investment banking. For the privilege of being turned into conformist students, and their families pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in skyrocketing tuitions that continues to outpace inflation. Why we are doing this to ourselves? And I wish I had asked myself when I was younger. My path was so tracked that in my 8th grade yearbook, one of my friends predicted accurately that 4 years later I would enter Stanford as a sophomore, and after the conventionally successful undergraduate career, and enroll in a Stanford Law Schools, where I completed even harder for the standard badge for success. The highest prize in the law students world is unambitious ambitious. Out of 10 of the thousands of undergraduates each year, only a few dozens get a Supreme Court clearship. After clearship on the Federal Appeals Court for a year, I was invited to interview for a clerk with the Justice Kennedy and Scalia. My meeting with the justice went well. I was so close to winning this last competition. If only I got the clearship. I thought I would be set alive, but I didn't at the time. I was devastated. In 2004, after I had built and sold PayPal, I ran into the an old friends for law schools who had helped me prepare my failed clearship applications. We had not spoken in the nearly decades, but his first question was not how are you doing, or how can you believe it's been so long. Instead, he grinned and asked, "So, Peter, are not you glad you didn't get the clearship?" With the benefits of hindsight, we both knew that winning that ultimate competition would have changed my life for worse, but I had actually cleared that Supreme Court, and I preferably would have spent my entire career talking dispositions and drafting other people's business deals with instead of crafting anything new. It's hard to say how much would be different, but opportunity costs were enormous. All Rhodes scholars had a great future in their past. War and peace. Professors downplay the cutthroat culture of academia, but the managers never tire of comparing business to war. MBA students carry around copies of Claudius and Santos. War metaphors invade our everyday business language. We use hundreds of the build up a sales force that will enable us to take the captive market and make a killing, but really it's competition, not business. That is like a war, largely necessary, supportly valiant, but ultimately destructive. Why do people compete with each other? Marx, the Shakespeare provides two models of understanding almost every kind of conflict. According to Marx, people light because they are different, and pro-light fight boundaries because they have completely different ideas and goals generated by markets by their very different material circumstances. The greater the differences, the greater the conflicts. Shakespeare, by contrast, all combatants look more or less alike. It's not at all clear why they should be fighting since they have nothing to fight about. Consider the opening lines for the Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike at dignity. The two houses are alike and yet they hate each other. They grow even more similar as feuded escalated. Eventually, they lose sight why they started fighting in the first place. In the world of business, at least, Shakespeare provides the superior guide. Inside a firm, people become obsessed with their competitors for career development, advancement. Then the firm themselves become obsessed with their competitors in the marketplace. Amid all the human drama, and people lose sight of what matters and focus on their rivals instead. Let's test 6% models in the real world. Imagine a production called Gates and Scamlet based on Romeo and Juliet's. Montage of its Microsoft tablet is Google. Two great families run by alpha nerds sure to clash on account of their seamless ads with all good tragedy and conflicts seems inevitable only in retrospect. In fact, it was entirely avoidable. These families came from the very different places, and the house of Montage built operating system and office applications. The house of Capsulate wrote search engine. What was there to fight about? Lots apparently as a startup, each client had been content to leave other alone on the prosper independently. But as they grow, they begin to focus on each other. Montages obsessed about the capsules, obsessed about montages and the results. Windows vs Chrome operating system, Bing vs Google Search and Explorer vs Chrome, Office vs Docs, and Surface vs Nexus. Just what cost the montages and capsulates their children. It cost Microsoft and Google their dominance, and Apple came along with the overlook them all. And in January 2013, Apple's market capitalization was 500 billion dollar, while Google and Microsoft combined were worth 467 billion dollar. And just 3 years before, Microsoft and Google were each more valuable than Apple, and war is costly business. Rivalry causes us to overface all opportunities and slavishly copy what has worked in the past. Consider the recent prolifications of mobile credit card readers, and in October 2010, the startup called Square releases a small white Square shaped product that let anyone with iPhone swipe and accept credit card. It was the first good payment processing solution for mobile handsets. Limitators prominently spring into the actions, and Canadian company called NetSquare launched its own card reader in the half moon shape. An input brought a cylindrical reader to the geometric pattern. In March 2012, eBay PayPal Units launched its own copycat card reader. It was shaped like a triangle and a clear job at Squares as three riders uh, simpler than fours. One gets the sense that this personal saga won't be until its apps of run out of the shapes. The hazards of limitations competitions may partially explain why individuals with the efforts like social ineptitude seems to be an advantage in the Silicon Valley today. If you are less sensitive to social cause, you are less likely to do the same thing as everyone else around you. If you are interested in making things or programming computers, you will be less afraid to pursue those activities single-mindedly and thereby become incredibly good at them. And then when you apply your skills, you are a little less likely than others to give up on your own convictions. This can be save you from getting caught up from the crowd, competing from the obvious prices. Competition can make people hallucinate opportunities where none exist. The crazy 90s version of this was the fire battle for the online pet store market. It was pets.com or the petstore.com, yes, petopia.com, yes, what seems like dozens of others. These companies were obsessed with the defining its revival precisely because there were no cheesy dog twice most aggressively. Who could create the best Super Bowl ball ads? These companies totally lost sight of wider questions of whether the online paid supply market was the right space to be in. Winning is better than losing, but everybody loses when the war is not won worth fighting. When Pets.com folded after the dot-com crash, $300 million of investment capital disappeared with it. And other times, rivalry is just weird and distracting. Consider the Saffordson conflicts between Larry Ellison and co-founder and CEO of Oracle, and Tom Sewell, a top sales man at Oracle, and Allison Proteas before he went on to found Siebel System in 1993. Ellison was lived at the what he thought was civil betrayal, and Sibyl hated being its shadow of his former boss. The two men were basically identical, hard-charging Chicagoan who loved to sell and hated to lose. So their hatreds run deep. Allison and Sibyl spent the second half of the 90s trying to sabotage the others, and at one point, Allison sent truckloads of ice cream sandwiches to Civil headquarters to try to convince Civil employees to jump ship. And the copy of the rappers "Summer is near" and "Oracle is here" to brighten your day and your careers. Strangely, Oracle intentionally accumulated enemies. Allison's theory was that it's always good to have an enemy, so long as it was large enough to appear threatening and motivational to employees, but not so large as to actually threaten the company. So Allison was probably thrilled when, in 1996, a small database company called Informix put up a billboard near Oracle Redwood Shores headquarters at Reed Carson Dinosaur Crossing, and another Informix billboard on the North Road Highway 101Z, and you have just uh, passed the Reed Road stores. So did we? And Oracle stock back with the billboard that implies that Informix software was slower than snails than Informix. Uh, CEO Phil White decided to make things personal. And when White learned that Larry Ellison enjoyed Japanese samurai culture, he compressed with their billboard, despite the Oracle logo along with the broken samurai sword. And the ad was not even really aimed at Oracle as an identity, let alone the consuming public. It was a personal attack on Ellison, but perhaps White spent a little too much time worrying about the competition while he was busy creating billboard. Informix imploded in the massive accounting scandal, and White soon found himself in the federal prison for securities frauds. If you can't beat a rival, it may be better to merge. I started Confinity with my co-founder Max Levsens in 1998. When we released the PayPal product in late 1999, Elon Musk's X.com was right on the heels, and our company's offices were 4 blocks apart on a University Avenues in Palo Alto, and X products mirrored our features for the feature. By late 1999, we were in all-out war. Many of us at the paper logged 100 hours work weeks, and no doubt that was counterproductive. But the focus was not on the objective productivity. The focus was defeating X.com. One of our engineers actually designed a bomb for this purpose, and when he presented the schematic at the team meeting, a climber heads prevailed that the proposal was attributed to extreme sleep deprivation. But in February 2000, Elon and I were more scared about the rapidly inflating tech bubble than we were about each other, and a financial crash would ruin us about before we could finish our fights. So in early March, we met a neural grounds cafe almost exactly equidistant to our offices. The negotiated 50-50 merger, and disclosing the revolutionary post-merger was not easy, but as far as problem go, it was a good one to have. And as a unfined team, we were able to ride out the dot-com crash and then build successful business. And sometimes you don't have to fight where that's true. You should fight for to win, and there is no middle ground. They either don't throw any punches or strike hard and end it quickly. And this advance can be hard to follow because pride and honor can get in any way. Hence, Hamlet says, exposing what is moral and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger there. Even for the exiles rightly to be great, it's not the stair without a great arguments, but greatly to find a quarrel in a straw when honor at the stair. For Hamlet, greatness means willingness to fight for reasons as thin as an exiles. Anyone would fight for things that matters. True heroes take their personal honor too seriously. They will fight for things that don't matter. This twisted logic is part of human nature, but it's disastrous in business. But if you can recognize competition as a destructive force instead of a sign of value, you are already more sense than most. And the next chapter is about how to use a clear head to build a monopoly business.